In the bitter cold of early 1945, under the gray skies of Western Germany, a column of American Shermans rolled through the shattered remains of a village that had once been called Elsdorf. Smoke drifted through broken walls, mingling with the distant rumble of artillery. It was the kind of day when engines seemed louder, when every sound carried across the frozen earth. Inside one of the tanks, the crew of the 3rd Armored Division prepared for yet another fight. They were tired, cautious, and experienced enough to know that a single mistake could mean the end. Ahead of them, hidden behind the ruins of a church, waited the most feared machine of the war, a German Tiger Lormwer. The encounter lasted only minutes. The Tiger fired first, its 80mm shell tearing through the air and slamming into the ground beside the lead Sherman. Dirt and shrapnel rained down as the American tank commander shouted orders. The gunner aligned the turret, adjusted for range, and fired. The round struck the Tiger squarely on its front armor, and to everyone's disbelief, it punched straight through. The massive German tank, long considered nearly invincible, erupted in smoke and flame. The crew inside never had a chance. When the smoke cleared, the men of the 3rd Armored sat in silence, staring at the burning hulk. They had no idea what had just happened. At first, they thought it was luck, a perfect shot at the right angle. But when the armor analysts arrived to inspect the wreckage, they discovered something strange. The round that destroyed the Tiger wasn't an experimental weapon or a new model. It was a standard 75mm shell from the Sherman's main gun. The only difference lay in a small, almost invisible detail. The shell casing had been overfilled with powder. What should have been an error, a dangerous mistake that could have destroyed the gun, had somehow turned into an act of precision destruction. That day, a single overfilled shell had given the Sherman the power to do the impossible. The discovery sparked questions. How could a simple mistake give a weapon that kind of power? The investigation began quietly, not as a legend but as a safety concern. Overcharged ammunition was no joke. If a case was filled beyond its safe limit, the pressure could cause the gun to explode. Yet when the 33rd Ordnance Battalion examined the remains, their data told a different story. The overcharged round had achieved a muzzle velocity far higher than normal, around 2,400 feet per second, compared to the usual 2,030. That extra force translated into exponential energy on impact, enough to tear through even the Tiger's thick frontal armor. This accidental discovery turned the Sherman's modest 75mm gun into something far more dangerous, if only for a moment. Word of the hit spread fast across armored units. Tank crews spoke in hushed tones about a new kind of ammunition. Not official, not approved, but real. They began to mark these heavier shells in chalk, setting them aside for the moments when they might face another Tiger. They called them Tiger killers. The official response was cautious. Ordnance officers ordered crews not to use overfilled rounds. Safety regulations were clear, but regulations were easy to ignore when survival depended on bending them. By the last months of the war, American tankers had learned that improvisation often meant the difference between life and death. They had already been modifying their machines in every way they could, welding extra armor from destroyed vehicles, stacking sandbags on the hull, or salvaging track links to reinforce weak spots. Against the powerful Tigers and Panthers, the Sherman had always been at a disadvantage. Its 75mm gun couldn't reliably penetrate the front armor of the German heavy tanks even at close range. The Tiger's 88mm could destroy a Sherman from over a mile away. Yet the Americans had one thing the Germans lacked: adaptability. Where German crews relied on superior engineering, the Allies relied on flexibility and innovation. The discovery of the overfilled shell fit perfectly into that pattern. While no one officially endorsed the use of such rounds, the event forced engineers to reconsider the limits of the Sherman's gun. Tests conducted later in England and the United States confirmed that the weapon could handle a slightly higher propellant charge than originally thought. These findings influenced the development of the new 76mm high-velocity rounds that appeared in the final months of the war and formed the foundation for post-war tank design. But in the field, science didn't matter. What mattered was survival. For the tankers of the 3rd Armored, every fight against a Tiger was a gamble. They knew the statistics. They knew how thin their armor was and how easily a single German round could end them. That's why the story of the overfilled shell mattered so much. It wasn't just about power. It was about hope. It was about the idea that maybe, just maybe, they had something that could even the odds. As the Allies pushed deeper into Germany, the fighting grew fiercer and closer. The open fields of Normandy were replaced by towns, factories, and forests where visibility was limited to a few dozen meters. In these brutal street battles, even a minor advantage could turn defeat into victory. The difference between life and death could be measured in seconds, or in the pressure of powder inside a brass casing. Somewhere in the vast industrial web that supplied the U.S. Army, perhaps in a factory in Detroit, or a munitions plant in Pennsylvania, a worker had filled one shell a little too much. He or she would never know it, but that small act, that human mistake, would change what happened on a battlefield thousands of miles away. It was a reminder that wars are not only fought by generals or planned by engineers. They are fought and often won by the unnoticed hands of ordinary people doing repetitive work under extraordinary pressure. The overfilled shell was never documented in official manuals, never recognized in ordnance records. But among the tank crews who fought through the Rhine, across Cologne, and into the shattered heart of Germany, it became part of the war's folklore. A whispered story told in mess halls and motor pools, about the time when one lucky round gave the underdog a chance to strike back. It wasn't the invention of a new weapon or a breakthrough in design. It was an accident, a simple, dangerous mistake that somehow turned in their favor. Yet in that accident lay a deeper truth about the war itself. For all its machines and strategies, it was still a human struggle, unpredictable, imperfect, and filled with moments where luck and bravery intertwined. When the fighting finally ended and the tanks stood silent, the story of the overfilled shell faded into the background, buried beneath official reports and statistics. But for those who had seen what it could do, it remained a symbol of resilience, of ingenuity, and of the thin line that separated survival from destruction. It proved that sometimes, even in the most mechanical of wars, the smallest human error could change the course of history. The Sherman Standard 75mm or M61 armor-piercing shell carried a muzzle velocity of around 2,030 feet per second. Against a Tiger's 100mm front plate, it was almost useless beyond point-blank range. Yet the shell that had destroyed the Ellsdorf Tiger had been clocked, through impact analysis and crater deformation, at nearly 2,400 feet per second, a massive increase for such a small weapon. At that speed, the projectile's kinetic energy rose exponentially, enough to pierce armor that had once seemed untouchable. The overcharged round had effectively turned the Sherman's modest 75mm cannon into a temporary, high-velocity weapon, something closer to the British 17-pounder in performance. And while the margin for safety was thin, the tactical effect was undeniable. Word spread quickly through the armored units. In a war where men often fought against impossible odds, even a rumor of new firepower was enough to spark hope. At first, officers ordered a halt to the use of the hot ammunition. Regulations were strict. Every shell had to meet standardized limits, and any deviation was considered a potential hazard. But in the field, rules had a way of bending under fire. Some crews began quietly setting aside the heavier shells, marking them with chalk or scratches. Tiger killers, they called them. It wasn't official policy. It wasn't even encouraged. But it worked. To understand why that mattered, one has to look at the larger picture of armored warfare in early 1945. The German war machine, once fueled by vast industrial might, was collapsing under Allied bombing. Fuel was scarce, replacements impossible to train, and yet the tanks that remained, Tigers, Panthers, and Jagdpanthers, were still formidable. Each engagement with them was a test of courage and ingenuity. The Americans, by contrast, were fighting a different kind of war, one built on logistics and adaptability. A Sherman could be repaired overnight, replaced within days, or modified in the field. Crews had become mechanics, engineers, and tacticians all at once. They welded extra armor from destroyed vehicles, loaded sandbags or track links onto the hull, and even experimented with new ammunition types scavenged from supply depots. In England, before D-Day, some British engineers had already seen the potential in upgrading the Sherman's gun. They had mounted their 17-pounder into a reworked turret, creating the Firefly, a variant that could take on the Tiger head-on. The Americans had been slower to adopt the change, confident that air power and numbers would offset the Tiger's dominance. But by 1945, that confidence was wearing thin. The encounter near Ellsdorf, one overcharged shell destroying one Tiger, symbolized something deeper than a lucky hit.